Hello and welcome to Alfalfa Livestream, a three-part webinar series sponsored by Alfalfa Seeds. Today's webinar is titled Alfalfa 2022, Not Your Grandfather's Alfalfa. My name is Abby Bauer, and I'm an editor for Horde Dairyman magazine based out of Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. Our editorial team also produces Hay and Forage Grower magazine and the Journal of Nutrient Management. When it comes to alfalfa, our company has deep roots with the forage crop, as our magazine's founder, W.D. Horde, was instrumental in growing alfalfa's popularity in Wisconsin and turning our state into America's dairyland. Today, alfalfa makes up a large part of cattle rations across the country and around the world, and our team here at Horde Dairyman and Hay and Forage Grower is proud to produce these webinars focusing on the future of alfalfa with our friends at Alfalfa Seeds. This session of Alfalfa Livestream will feature 3 speakers. Following their presentations, we will open the show up to audience questions. If you have a question for any of our speakers, please type it into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will address those later in the webcast. To start off today's program, I would first like to welcome Doug Bastian, the North American sales leader for Alfalfa Seeds. Alfalfa Seeds and their partners provide agronomic support, education, and alfalfa varieties for today's ruminant animal producers and commercial hay growers. Thank you for joining us, Doug.
Thank you, Abby. I would like to personally welcome you to the Alfalfa Livestream webinar series sponsored by Alfalfa Seeds. We know there are a lot of choices out there when it comes to purchasing alfalfa seed, and one thing that sets us apart is our focus on alfalfa and forage excellence. We pride ourselves on being a leader in variety development, with our connection to our parent company, Corteva Agriscience. Their ability to deploy technologies in alfalfa used in other crops gives us a real competitive advantage in the market. We thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to watch this webinar today. Our intent is to provide you with some good information that can help you increase productivity on your own farm or on your customer's farm. We are excited to kick off the first of 3 Alfalfa Livestream webinars today, and we hope that you will find this webinar on variety selection informative and take away some key points you can use when making your Alfalfa Seeds variety decisions this year. It's all you, Addie.
Yes, thank you, Doug. Now I would like to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. First, we have Mr. Donald Miller, who is currently the Director of Product Development for Alfalfa Seeds and is based out of Nampa, Idaho. Then we'll have Dr. Ray Smith, who serves as an Extension Professor for the Department of Plant and Soil Sciences at the University of Kentucky. Our third speaker will be Dr. Dan Putnam, an Extension Professor for the Department of Plant Sciences at the University of California, Davis. So first up will be Don Miller, and I look forward to hearing from you. But before we begin, we will ask our audience to participate in our first poll question. So everybody, if you're ready for a little participation here, we would like to ask you this question. What management decisions have you used to increase yield in your alfalfa fields? Please select one of the following: variety selection, fall dormancy, pest resistance, or winter survival. So everyone in the audience, feel free to pick one of those answers. Looks like we have a good group of attendees online today and good participation. We'll have our webinar producer, Michaela, will close that poll. And the answers will pop here. And Don, if you want to address these answers now, you'll see that variety selection was the most popular, tie between fall dormancy and winter survival, and then pest resistance was the 4th choice.
Well, you know, as an alfalfa breeder, I think that variety selection choice is probably a good one. It encompasses all the other things there: fall dormancy, pest resistance, and winter survival. But you know, when you take all those things into account when you make your variety selection, I think that has the potential of increasing your yield.
Very good. All right, so now we have Don Miller from Alfalfa Seeds. He will begin with our first presentation of the day.
Okay, well, whoop, it advanced too far here. There we go. Okay, well, keeping in with our theme today, not your grandfather's alfalfa, myself and the other presenters today would like to maybe give you an update of how far alfalfa has been improved, the amount of gains that we've made in the last 30 years, things that were not available to your grandfather when he was, or your grandparents when they were selecting a variety. And so as my part of that, I'm going to cover alfalfa winter survival and fall dormancy ratings, two tools that a grower can use to improve yield and persistence. Okay, well, when we talk about fall dormancy, let's review that a little bit. Alfalfa originally originated in the Middle East, and then as it moved around the world, the alfalfas, if they were grown in cold climates, they adapted to that, and eventually we had alfalfa adapted to a whole range of environments. And so as alfalfa breeders, we took advantage of that information and eventually classified all the alfalfa varieties into 10 dormancy classes. A fall dormancy 10 would be one that would be grown in a warm area, and then all the gradation all the way up to a fall dormancy 1, which would be an alfalfa that had adapted to cold environments. So what happened when those plants adapted? Essentially, the plants that could adapt to that cold area, they, as a means of surviving severe winters, these dormant alfalfa plants, they reacted day length and temperature by shutting down in the fall and essentially had short growth. Well, you can see in this photograph here on the screen now, that plant in front, as we're going into the winter, it knows that it's reacting to day length and temperature, and it knows that the harsh winter is coming, and so it's trying to conserve its root reserves by shutting down all its growth. The plant there in the background still growing. It's not reacting to the day length or the temperature. And what happens to it is that as the winter approaches and we get freezing temperatures, that top growth gets frozen. The plant tries to recover and put up new top growth, and eventually in that severe environment, it exhausts all its root reserves and does not survive the winter. And so those plants that did adapt to day length and temperature had a means of surviving the winter by conserving their root reserves. So this is what actually looks like as far as that scale of 1 to 10. Here on the far left, you see a variety 1. That's one that has adapted to that day length shortening and that cold temperature. And if we have check varieties for all those 10 dormancy classes and we plant them out in the spring, let them grow all summer, and then we cut them all back at the same time in the fall, then we'll get this stair stepping that you see in this diagram here. The plants on the left, they shut down, the day lengths is shortening, temperatures are getting colder, so they're conserving their root reserves by not putting up a lot of top growth. And then we have a gradation all the way down up to that fall dormancy 10, where those plants don't know what a winter is, and they keep putting up top growth and don't react to day length or temperature. Now, when we, as an alfalfa breeder, when we try to release a new variety, what we'll do is we'll plant these 10 checks out in the spring, plant right next to those our new potential varieties, and then we let them grow all summer long. And then as we approach the fall, we'll cut all the check varieties and the new alfalfa variety back at the same time. And then we'll measure 25 days later, we'll measure the height of our new alfalfa variety. And if it's the same height as a fall dormancy 6 check, then we label it as a fall dormancy 6. So that's how alfalfa varieties are get that fall dormancy rating, based on the height of that variety in relation to a check variety in the fall. This is what it looks like out in the field. An example of fall growth, you can see on the left a fall dormancy 5, and then on the right a fall dormancy 3. This is in the fall, the days are getting shorter, and that fall dormancy 3 is starting to shut down, where the 5 is still has not reacting quite as severely to that temperature change and the shortening of the day, and so it still is putting up some growth. But that's the type of differences that you'll see according to that dormancy rating. But there are some issues with this fall dormancy rating. When your grandfather or grandparents were selecting an alfalfa variety in the past, they would base their selection based on fall dormancy, thinking that if, say, if they were in Wisconsin, they selected a fall dormancy 3 or a fall dormancy 4, that variety might survive the winter. But it had some limitations because fall dormancy is an indirect estimate of winter survival based on that variety's height and growth response to shortening day length and increasing total temperatures. It never is just based on that height in the fall and never was a direct measurement of winter survival. It was the best thing we had at the time, say 30 years ago, to somewhat predict winter survival. Did that plant shut down and protect its root reserves? But it had some limitations. So, you know, the public institutions and the private industry eventually decided that we needed to do something to get a little bit more tools available to the grower in selecting a variety, more than just the fall dormancy rating. So eventually we came up with a second rating called the winter survival rating. Again, we planted the varieties in the spring, let them grow all summer long, took the fall growth measurement to come up with a fall dormancy rating. But then we let those plants go through that severe winter, say in Wisconsin or Minnesota, and then we imposed another rating on its survival after it went through that winter. And so that rating was on a scale of 1 to 6. And we found that if we had a score of 1 or 2, that was a pretty good winter survival rating. If we had a, say, 4, 5, or 6, that was varieties that didn't survive the winter very well. Even though they might have done well on a fall dormancy rating in the fall, that additional rating of winter survival gave us some more information in selecting varieties. And what we found was that, you know, for the most part, in the national publications, they report winter survival rating on whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But in recent years, some of the industry has also fine-tuned that rating system, and you may even see published ratings of a 2.2. Did we have a low 2 or a high 2, or maybe we had a 1.9 or 1.8? So you may see some published ratings that sort of subdivide those scales. But and what we found is that if we get a winter survival rating of lower than a 2.3, we generally have a good assurance that those varieties can withstand some winter versus one that would have a higher rating on winter survival. So this is what it actually looks like when we're doing the evaluations. Here's 2 plants that are representative of the fall dormancy 4, 2 different varieties. You can see both varieties in the fall when we measured them for plant height. As the days started getting shorter, they were both the same height in the fall. They essentially looked the same in the fall, but when we let those varieties that were classified as a fall dormancy 4 go through the winter, the variety on the right didn't survive that winter quite as well as the variety on the left. And so what we found was that with this new winter survival rating, we could take a fall dormancy 4 and then sort of enhance the information we had on that variety and impose a second rating, that winter survival rating. So that fall dormancy 4 variety that survived the winter very well, we gave it a winter survival rating of a 1. The one that fall dormancy 4 that didn't survive the winter very well, in this case, we gave it a winter survival rating of a 3. Now, if there was a dead plant, it would have got a score of 6. So again, both those plants looked the same in the fall, but having gone through the winter, they did perform differently. So when our grandparents 30 years ago were selecting a variety, all they had was that fall dormancy rating. And say if there were 84 alfalfa varieties that were classified as fall dormancy 4, they would pick one and put it in the field. But there was differences as far as survivability of those fall dormancy 4s, but they didn't have the information available to them to make that distinction. So now you can see here the alfalfa variety ratings of 2022. We have 84 varieties out there on the market that are rated with a fall dormancy rating of 4. But of those 84 varieties, there is a difference as far as winter survival. 10 of those varieties have a winter survival rating score of 1. 43 of those have a winter survival rating of a 2. So now with that additional rating, we can sort of subdivide those fall dormancy 4s and find out which ones can withstand a little bit more severe winter. Same thing on the fall dormancy 5. 30 varieties, 5 of those have a rating of 1, 10 have a rating of 2. So again, more information that our grandparents didn't have in that variety selection process. So how do we utilize these 2 ratings, fall dormancy rating and the winter survival rating, to optimize our yield and persistence? There we go. Okay, essentially when we talk about fall dormancy, as we go up that scale from a 1 to a 10, we see more spring growth. We see later growth in the fall. When you compare, in this case, fall dormancy 5 here versus a fall dormancy 3, that fall dormancy 5 is going to wake up a little bit earlier in the spring, have a little bit longer growth in the fall. And so essentially it has a little bit longer growing season. And so as you look at differences in fall dormancy, that's what the type of information that you would see. So we know that as we go up that scale on that fall dormancy rating, there's a little bit more yield potential. Fall dormancy 4 generally out yields a 3. A fall dormancy 5 generally out yields a 4. A fall dormancy 6 generally out yields a 5. But how far can we go up on that fall dormancy scale and capture that yield without getting some winter kill? That winter survival rating is what's giving that additional information to make that choice. Now, when our grandparents 30 years ago were selecting a variety, all they had was that fall dormancy rating. And so sometimes they would pick a fall dormancy 4. Maybe in the past they were doing a 3, and they wanted to capture a little bit more yield going up in dormancy. They plant a 4, go along a couple of years, do very well, and then all of a sudden they got some winter kill. Well, it seemed like the only reaction that they could do in the future was, if they wanted to prevent winter kill and they had a fall dormancy 4 that did winter kill, they moved back in fall dormancy and selected the next time they planted alfalfa a fall dormancy 3. But again, they gave up a little bit of yield potential in doing that. So we know that as you go up in that yield, that fall dormancy rating, we have more yield potential. But with that second rating, that winter survival rating, now we have another tool that wasn't available to our grandparents to temper that a little bit and get some insurance policy of being able to survive the winter. So now if we say in the past we normally used a fall dormancy 3 on our farm, but we want to increase the yield potential a little bit, switching from a fall dormancy 3 to a 4. As long as we take in tandem that selection using that winter rating as a means of predicting how well that fall dormancy 4 is going to survive the winter, as long as we're in that 2 range or lower, we have a little bit of an insurance policy saying that we can capture a little bit more yield moving from a 3 to a 4, but have a little information as far as survival of that 2 and a little bit less fear of winter kill. Same thing if we're moving from a fall dormancy 4 to a 5, again, paying attention to that winter survival rating gives us a little bit of assurance that we are going to have a better variety as far as surviving the winter. Now again, when we move up in dormancy, pay attention to that winter survival rating. If you're moving from a 4 to a 5, make sure the winter survival rating is less than 2.3. If we're moving from a 3 to a 4, again, keep aware of that winter survival rating. Now, this is not absolute. Like I said, even within a fall dormancy 2, there's high 2s, low 2s, again, and there are other factors that can contribute to winter kill, but it does tell you within that fall dormancy 5 or in that fall dormancy 4, which varieties are the best as far as winter survival, and then gives you a little bit more educated choice on picking your variety that with a little bit more yield potential, but also the ability to survive the winter. So Abby, I think that is all I have.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Miller, for going through those ratings and letting us know how growers can utilize them when they're making purchasing and growing decisions. So thank you very much. Before we go on to our second presentation, we are going to ask our audience for their opinion on another question. And we would like to know, what major pest or disease is limiting your production the most when it comes to alfalfa? Please select one of the following. We have aphids, aphanomyces, root diseases, or stem nematode. So please pick the most limiting factor there on that list. And when we pull up the results, we'll get to see what our audience members are dealing with. And we have people from all across the country online and in Canada. So we'll get a variety of answers, I expect. So here are the results. Aphids was the most common answer at 41%, followed by root diseases, and then Anamyces, and then stem nematode coming in fourth. So our next presenter will be Dr. Ray Smith. Again, he comes to us from the University of Kentucky, and he can talk about these answers and then go into his discussion on some diseases and pests that are affecting alfalfa today. Go ahead, Dr. Smith.
Great. Glad to be with everyone today. And each of those answers that you gave, I'll talk about that in different aspects as I talk about what is important when making a variety decision, especially in relation to pest resistance. And I'm often asked this question by producers in Kentucky and surrounding states. So I'll just kind of take you through the kind of practical answers that I give, and hopefully that is useful to you. Okay, let me jump in here to the alfalfa variety ratings. Those of you that have gotten in Forage Grower, the November issue has this alfalfa variety ratings. You'll notice that you can also go to alfalfa.org and pull down this publication. Let me explain a little bit about this publication. Okay, I may be having issues advancing. And try again. Okay, so you're going to see on page 2 of this publication a description. Now, Don has already talked about fall dormancy and winter survival. Let me talk to you a bit about the resistance ratings. Okay, and I think I'll let you advance these as I go through. So you're going to see this chart there on page 2 of the publication. You're going to see resistance ratings often in different advertisements for varieties. And it's kind of obvious that you want something resistant. You don't want something in a susceptible category. Let me explain what each of those mean. So susceptible means majority of the plants are going to die if that disease is present. Low resistance as well. So you want something that's going to be in the moderate resistant category, resistant or high resistant. So MR, R, or HR. Now you'll notice that even at the high resistance, the HR category, that's greater than 50% of the plants are resistant to that pathogen. It'd be nice if there was 100% resistance, but due to the broad genetic background of alfalfa, that rarely occurs. But we found that in alfalfa, the populations are very broad and the number of plants in the field is sufficient that if you have greater than 50% resistant, you tend to have very good survival. And in many cases, even that resistant category, that 31 to 50% of the plants resistant are suitable. So let me just give you an example of that with the variety response to the disease of Aphanomyces. So if you look on the bottom, you'll notice the 3 varieties are rated as HR. Each of these columns is a variety. We've got 7 there that are resistant, couple moderate resistant, 1 low. The marks here mean that there was no notation, which we would assume would mean they're susceptible. The bars that you see, they relate to the vigor of the plant, the vigor of the stand, how vigorous the seedlings were, say a little bit over a month after planting. The line that you see across here relates to the plant survival or the percent stand. So the line up here toward the top of the graph is 80 to 100% of the stand was there. The line down low means a lot of plants had not survived. And so you'll notice that those varieties that had an HR or R resistant rating, they all had good plant vigor, they all had good survival. So kind of going along with what I said before, is that an R or HR generally is sufficient for a very good stand. But when you move into those categories of the moderate or low resistance or no rating, then often you have poor vigor and you have poor plant counts. There are many disease pests in the US. Now, the ones I've listed here are those that we actually have resistance to. Bacterial wilt, verticillium, fusarium, anthracnose race 1, Phytophthora root rot, Aphanomyces race 1, and race 2. Now, let me show you the picture of those disease pests in just a moment. So, Phytophthora root rot. You notice there on the left, there's a healthy, vigorous root, very white type appearance. That's what we want. Phytophthora root rot, though, causes discoloration of the root. Eventually, it causes the root to actually rot off. The plant may still survive, but it has a very shallow root system. So that's not what we want. So that's Phytophthora root rot. Fortunately, there's high levels of resistance. Anthracnose, that disease is noted by diamond-shaped lesions on the stems and a shepherd's crook type appearance to the stem. That's what anthracnose looks like. Again, fortunately, we have good resistance in many varieties to anthracnose. So you may ask, how do I know what diseases I have or what insect pests I have? You can get this Alfalfa Analyst publication. Easiest way is alfalfa.org. But even if you just Google Alfalfa Analyst, it's going to pull that publication up. And it's going to show you pictures of the major disease pests, the major insect pests, even some of the nutrient deficiencies. So I encourage you to pull up that publication. Now let me go back to choosing a variety. So Alfalfa Analyst isn't going to tell you the variety to choose. It's just telling you what diseases and where they occur. But if you get this Alfalfa variety publication, and as I mentioned, the November issue of Hay and Forage Grower has the 2022 edition, and that's going to tell you much more specific information. So for example, in that publication, we have 4 varieties here, A, B, C, and D. These varieties, this is actually in the fall dormancy rating 4 in that category. You'll notice that all 4 of those varieties have resistant or highly resistant to the major pathogens. So all of these diseases, they are R or HR with one exception down here. So the long and the short is for those diseases, any of those varieties would do well. If you wanted extra insurance, then you'd choose a variety like B that had HR or high resistance to those main pathogens. But if we go to the fall dormancy 8 category, you're going to see that of the 4 varieties that I've chosen here, A, B, C, D, then several of those do not have high R or HR resistance. In essence, if there's a blank, you can assume that it's susceptible or it has a low resistance. So, what do? You could just say, well, I'm not going to choose those varieties that are in that have a blank or are susceptible, but you can refine that a little bit more because there may be a very good variety adapted to your area. So let me just explain how to go through and determine if that disease is a problem in your area. So for example, with Aphanomyces root rot, across the center and northern tier of the US, with the exception of the far west coast you can see there, Aphanomyces can be severe. But if you're in the southern US, it tends to be more moderate. So when you see this kind of map, you see there's a potential across the US, you say, well, I guess I do want Aphanomyces root rot resistance. And that would be true. And this is what you're going to see by having that resistance. So there on the right, you'll notice that the resistant plants or the resistant variety to Aphanomyces race 1, excellent stands. Again, this is less than a month after establishment. But that variety that's susceptible, a very thin stand, and the plants that are there are weak. So you want to have resistance. But now I've had a number of farms that I've been to in the last 5 years that I'll go to the farm and they'll say, what is my issue? And their field looks like the one on the left. And they'll say, and I maybe ask them about Aphanomyces. They'll say, well, I made sure I had resistance to that. But often I've found that they have resistance just to race 1. So my main recommendation would be try a variety that has resistance to race 2. And you can send the material into the lab, but the easiest thing is definitely if you suspect issues and you're doing a spring planting, would be to make sure that you have resistance to Aphanomyces race 1 and race 2. So here's an example. These are the varieties in the fall dormancy 2 and 3 category. Those are the beginning of that chart. You'll notice that a number of varieties are rated as R or HR, so those are good choices. Several of the varieties, I've listed here just the companies, not the variety names. Several of the companies are susceptible to race 2. If you've not had any issues to Aphanomyces, maybe you're in that southern US area, you may well not need the race 2. But if you're in that northern tier or you've seen issues, then race 2 would be very important. There's a number of important insect pests in the US. The spotted alfalfa aphid, pea and blue alfalfa aphid. There's the potato leaf hopper and several nematodes, the stem, the southern root knot and northern root knot nematodes. Now, many of you across the US would know that alfalfa weevil is an important insect pest, but there's no known resistance within varieties, so your only real choice is some management or often requiring a spray. So the ones I've listed are the ones that we do have levels of resistance. So for example, potato leaf hopper. If you're in the eastern or central US, then you've got potential for potato leaf hopper damage, even up there into Canada. So if you're seeing this kind of coloration, particularly if you're seeing the potato leaf hopper itself, then what do? The easy answer is, well, I'll just spray for that. But there are variety options. So for example, if you look at this, you would rather have the variety on the left there than the variety on the right that's susceptible, that has severe damage and stunting from potato leaf hopper. So a good choice would be, I'm going to choose a variety with resistance. Either you're going to do that or you're going to decide that you may need to spray, not all the time, but when the damage is severe. So pea aphid is another, and that is across the US and up into Western Canada and parts of Eastern Canada. So pea aphid is something that ideally you're going to try to find varieties with resistance. Fortunately, many of the varieties that are available in the US and Canada do have good levels of resistance to pea aphid. If you move on to another aphid, the blue alfalfa aphid, fortunately, the severity of blue alfalfa aphid is more in the Southwest. But in recent years, even since this map was published, it's moved up to some issues even in Southern Oregon and Southern Idaho. But if you're in the Eastern US, there's very little worry with blue alfalfa aphid. So it's not something that would be a priority. So if we look at the chart, the alfalfa variety ratings, and this is varieties in the fall dormancy 2 and 3. There's only 3 of the ones I'm showing you that have resistance to the blue alfalfa aphid. Again, if you're in areas that's not an issue, then there's no reason to choose a variety like that. So I've talked about getting varieties with resistance to the pests that are an issue in your area. But don't forget the importance of management, both just for yield, but also in helping alleviate pest issues. So things you can do: buy good quality seed, avoid poorly drained areas to plant alfalfa into. Do not plant alfalfa after another legume crop. Keep soil pH and nutrient levels at optimum. Control insects because they can interact with diseases. Cut at a late bud stage to allow replenishment of root carbohydrates. Buy resistant varieties if pest issues are known to be a problem in your region. Let me just give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. So the picture on the left, you'll see there's damage from potato leaf hopper in much of that field. So by this time, you can't go back and decide I want a resistant variety. You're too late. You're going to have to spray. But you may see damage in the field, and it's actually a management issue more than a potato leaf hopper. It may not even be potato leaf hopper. It may be boron deficiency. because boron deficiency stunts the plants and causes yellowing of the leaves. And so if you keep the nutrient levels optimum, then you're going to know that you're not having a nutrient deficiency issue. It would be potentially a pest issue, and you can tell that by going out there in the field and looking. Another example of a management issue, Sclerotinia crown and root rot. In the eastern and parts of the central U.S. and the western U.S., this can be an issue, particularly with fall plantings. There's no known resistance. So with Sclerotinia, you're going to need to keep your fertility in good shape. If you're doing a fall planting, you really need to be thinking about late summer planting, talking early to mid-August, so the plants are large enough to survive this late fall disease or go to a spring planting. So you've got to do a management solution. One other example is alfalfa crown rot. The plant on the left that we've split the root in two, you'll notice that there's white appearance in the root. There's no damage in the top of the crown. This is what we want. But in many stands, particularly stands that are getting a little bit older, will do have alfalfa crown rot. There's no known resistance. You're seeing a rotting in the top of the root, and you're seeing discoloration down through the root. The solution to this is you maintain healthy stands, cut in the right cutting timing, maintaining good fertility. And these two plants come out of the same field. The one on the right that has the crown rot was planted in the lower section of the field that's poorly drained. So maybe don't even plant alfalfa in an area like that. Now, once you've made decisions about the pest you have, buying resistant varieties, then make sure that you look at the variety trial reports from your state and from your region. For example, in Kentucky, I tell people to Google KY forages to get to our forage website, and they can click on variety trials. That's going to pull up the publication that's called we just released our 2021 alfalfa report. And that's full of charts. So we look on the next page of that publication. We'll see a chart that lists varieties on the left, gives a good bit of information, but most people are looking at what is the yield. So your goal is to choose a top yielding variety, not just one that has good pest resistance, but one that also yields well. That's kind of obvious. One that shows good stand survival is another obviously important thing. So once you've chosen based on that, there are a couple of other comments that I have. So quoting from an article that Dan Putnam wrote a few years ago, he said seed price is important at some level. If you don't consider variety performance, then you may be losing yield potential. So the point here is don't be thinking first about price, which often we tend to do when we're buying things. Seed price should only be considered if two varieties show equal performance in pest resistance. Often the higher price seed is higher price because of that package of good yield, good pest resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, very much for explaining those different pests and problems that are out there and things that growers can do to prevent or at least reduce their impact. So thank you very much. And the quote that you had very smoothly leads us into our third presenter for today's webinar. But first, we have one more poll question for our audience. So everyone, if you could please look at the poll on your screen and pick one of the answers for the question. What trait is most needed in a new alfalfa variety? And this is your opinion, purely your opinion, but drought tolerance, forage quality, herbicide tolerance, or salt tolerance. So if you could pick an answer there. And in a moment, we will close the poll and see what our diverse audience sees as the most important factor in a new alfalfa variety. So we had two that rose to the top. Drought tolerance was the first at 45%, followed by forage quality at 38%, and then both the herbicide tolerance and salt tolerance came in at 9% each. So our next speaker, Dr. Dan Putnam from the University of California, Davis, can address those poll results, and then he will be talking more about the future needs of alfalfa producers and what might be coming down the pipeline in alfalfa varieties. So please take it away, Dr. Putnam.
Thanks very much. A pleasure to be here and speak with you today about alfalfa varieties. I was pleased to see some of the responses in the poll. in the West, of course, water is one of the key issues, but even in rain-fed areas, you know, we have drought problems, and so that is a definite issue. I'm going to talk today a little bit more about the you know, the process of producing alfalfa varieties, but also what our objectives might be. Let's see if this is going. So I got a hesitation there. Okay, there we go. What are the needs of an alfalfa producer? Well, we certainly need high yields and high levels of pest resistance, and those are probably some of the key issues. Don talked with you about stand persistence and winter kill, cold tolerance, but also heat and salinity tolerance are key. And drought tolerance is probably key in areas where water becomes limiting, like here in California this year and over many years. But we're also looking for unique traits and high quality. This shows a kind of interesting. You know, the title of today's webinar is "It's Not Your Grandfather's Alfalfa." Now, I think you can see here that the differences in yields in California and Arizona over many years back to the early part of the 20th century, where we had essentially no breeding had been done at that point. And then the breeding of new varieties came into play in the 60s and 70s and even 80s. But we had a lot of other improvements, particularly in mechanization of haymaking. But we've seen a leveling off, actually, unfortunately, of yields over the last 20 years or so. And I think a lot of it's due to the increased demands for high quality and shorter cutting schedules. Next slide. Okay, and this is actually all over the country. We have a difference between the average yields. This is, you know, the gray bars here are the average yields in a region, and the orange bars are the top 10% of the farms in that region, and then the blue bars are the cultivar trials. For example, in Kentucky, where they report cultivar yields, or here in California, where you see the difference. So this is what we call the yield gap. We know that for sure that we can improve yields in alfalfa, and the question is, what is required to bridge that yield gap between the average yields in an area and the potential yields in that area? Variety choice is really one of those key aspects, and but it's along with lots of other management factors, and I think even breeders would admit that some of these agronomic factors are probably as important or more important in many cases than the variety selection. But we have to think of it as a package with good drainage, weed and pest management, optimum cutting schedules, harvest management, and irrigation management. And we need, on the case of the varieties, we need defense, that is resistance and tolerance, and also offense, that is yield and quality improvements. Can you tell the difference between varieties in the field? And I would challenge anyone in the audience, with the exception of Don Miller, which maybe he could tell, I don't know, but to walk into a field and say, I know what the name of that variety is, you really simply don't know whether the variety is a limiting factor unless you put them side by side with another variety. Let's see, for some reason this is not advancing. Okay, and in this case, you can see here the variety comparison in a short season 4-cut system up in the Intermountain area of California and Oregon. You can see here, you don't really see the differences as dramatically in that environment as you would in, say, Davis in the Central Valley, which is a long season 7 or 8 cut system. And here you can really see the yield differences under that situation. So, but even here we had about a 15% yield difference, and here we have about a 30% yield difference in that environment. And is that an important difference? And the answer is absolutely yes. And this next graph shows only the difference due to variety choice over, say, a 3 or 4 year period. You can see here the difference between the highest and the lowest yielding variety in our trials here at in Fresno County. You can see, and the question is that economically a good return on investment? And generally speaking, the differences in the seed are on the order of $2 to $4 a pound between the highest price and the lowest price seed. And that's a very small amount of money compared with the return in yields over a period of time. So you got to look at the performance of a variety, not just the cost of the seed. This is the process by which varieties are developed. Essentially, a breeder will assemble germplasm from lots of different areas of the world, develop populations, evaluate those families, and select top performance, and also hybridize and select or cross those lines to try to understand what the optimum combination might be. For some reason, these are not advancing quickly. They also will repeat this process to make sure that they get a variety that can be put into a field trial for eventual release. Now, this whole process takes between 5 and 10 years, and it's a very painstaking process. And but the seed you see in the marketplace is a reflection of the tremendous effort that private companies or universities might have done to develop new varieties. This process takes older lines, which are just very highly variable. There's some good lines in there and some very poor lines, and the mean value of those populations is very low, whereas as you go on, the mean value of those populations becomes higher and higher in terms of yield and other characteristics. This is a diverse population of alfalfa variety is a population, not a uniform type of product. So this shows some of that effort that goes into that individual plant selection, putting them in different kinds of environments like salt environments, cold environments, and so forth. Next slide. Why don't you go ahead and advance them, because they're not advancing fast here. You can see the half sib families, the crosses that are done. Next slide. And then eventually you put them into yield trials. And here we're trying to predict yields with drones using drone flights. Next slide. And finally putting them in trials to test against many other companies or other varieties in those trials to have data available. Next slide. What does the future hold for alfalfa varieties? Well, we're hoping certainly higher yields, but also there's a lot of promise of biotechnology. We have 2 traits currently available, Roundup Ready and Harv Extra. And coming down the line, CRISPR-R is genetic modification, which has a different regulatory pathway than insertion, which is an important thing. And we're also looking for breeding to help us solve this yield quality trade-off that we see. We're looking for salinity and drought tolerance, persistence, and also things like grazing tolerance, improved insect and disease resistance, and also unique utilization patterns. Next slide. So this shows you a recent trial that we just got done with in Fresno County that we tested a range of about 35 varieties under high and low salinity levels. You can see a cumulative average was about 22% hit with high salinity levels. You can see the differences here. These are in tons per acre, but still under high salinity, alfalfa is actually pretty highly saline tolerant in general. And next slide, we've also seen some differences due to variety. You can see here that some of the highest yielding varieties under low salinity are also fairly high yielding under high salinity. And this is one of the things that we're looking for. Fall dormancy is a real key issue here. If we can start the video. This is a student holding up in the spring of this year the more non-dormant varieties next to the dormant varieties, as Don has explained. You can see here the tremendous difference in yield. We can push dormancies up to an 8 or a 9 here in the Sacramento Valley of California, and these are the more say the fall dormancy 3s and 4s, and that makes a tremendous difference in terms of yield and also quality. Next slide. This is a data set that we have a number of years ago where we planted a whole range of fall dormancies from 3s and 4s up to 9s. And you can see here the tremendous, about a 2-ton yield advantage of the non-dormants at this site. But you can see a reduction in quality. So these non-dormants tend to be a little lower in quality because they grow so much faster and have a higher stem ratio compared with the leafier leafier dormant varieties, which grow slower and are lower yielding, but they're much more leafy. Next slide. But the key issue is that you have to choose a fall dormancy appropriate for your area. This is the high elevation plantings up in the intermountain areas of the Pacific Northwest. Next slide. And here's the plantings down in 11 cut system near Mexico and in southern Arizona, where you see here fall dormancy 8s and 9s. You would not plant a fall dormancy 4 here. It would really limit your yields. Next slide. We have, though, a tremendous effect of quality, and this is the average penalty, I guess you'd have to say, for lower quality. These are the supreme, the low fiber hays, and these are high fiber hays. And this data set from about 10 years ago gives you about a $40 to $50 penalty for low quality. Next slide. We do know that cutting schedule probably has a more important effect than variety, but varieties do have an effect on quality and can have an effect on quality. And the easiest way to get there is, of course, with lower fall dormancy, but then of course you get a yield penalty. So these early cuttings give you about 2 tons or 2.5 tons less than a late cutting, but you look at all the high quality harvests in there. Next slide. One of the ways to try to break this is to have varieties that have improved quality characteristics. This is the Harv Extra and the Higest trait that we tested here compared with conventional. And yes, you get a better digestibility in these lines compared with conventional lines at the same cutting schedule. Keep in mind that shorter cutting schedules also get you the same place. Next slide. So the concept there is that some of these interact with cutting schedules so that you can extend your cutting schedules to a later cut and still obtain the same NDF digestibility as an early cut system. And so this is actually somewhat of a yield trait as well as a quality trait. Next slide. Remember that there's a lot of targets for alfalfa breeding. Next slide. Just keep going through this. And we want to look at both offense and defense. Next slide. And these are the range of varieties currently available, and we really need to take advantage of this because there's a lot of effort that goes into these varieties. Next slide. And we also publish information about our variety trials. We tested currently about 4 places in California, and so that data is available to anybody. Next slide. And remember to follow what Ray mentioned here, is that your recommendations are going to be local. For example, in the Central Valley here, we would look at fall dormancy 7 to 10. We don't really care that much about winter survival. It's pretty mild winter here. We don't actually have Aphanomyces in that area or potato leafhopper, but we do have a big problem with pea aphids and Phytophthora and nematodes, particularly stem nematode. Next slide. Each variety takes 5 to 10 years to develop, and remember, we got to take advantage of those efforts. We need to reject those varieties which are old enough to vote. We put them in our trials because they generally are at the bottom of our trials, but you need to take advantage of all that breeding effort. The full genetic potential of that crop is contained in that tiny little seed. And varieties really are populations with lots of diversity, which is a good thing to some degree. And we need to look at local adaptation and buy only the highest quality seed. Next slide. So key points here, and that is look at performance first, look at yield, look at fall dormancy adaptation for your area, push the fall dormancy to a highest level as they still survive the winters, prioritize the pest resistance rating, look at evidence for superior persistence, biotech traits, and the quality issue, but watch for this yield quality trade-off in alfalfa varieties, and as well as with cutting schedules. So with that, bring it to a close. I don't know if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Putnam. And once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Putnam, Dr. Miller, and Dr. Smith for sharing this background information, your knowledge on alfalfa, and then recommendation for growers across the country and wherever they're located. So thank you very much. At this time, I'll ask all three of our panelists to turn on their cameras, and we will answer audience questions. If you are listening in today to our live program, feel free to type any questions into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen, and we will answer those now. So please go ahead and submit your questions. We have a few questions here, so I will start. And Don, I will send this first question to you. If my alfalfa winter kills, can I plant alfalfa seed to thicken up that field?
It sort of depends on how old your alfalfa field is. If you just planted an alfalfa field and you got winter killed during that first year, you can come back in and replant and thicken that field up with alfalfa. But if that alfalfa field is older than a year, we have a condition called autotoxicity, where the old established plants are putting something in the soil that would inhibit the growth of new seed out there in the field. So if you're older, if you have winter kill in an older field, say 3 or 4 years old, maybe you need to take that alfalfa out and plant some other crop, or maybe even come interseed a grass into that thin alfalfa.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add to that one?
That's exactly how I word it when I'm talking to producers. So something really important for producers to remember.
We would have the same recommendation here, no difference of opinion.
Very good. This next question, Dr. Smith, I'll start with you. Am I better off to plant a potato leafhopper variety or spray a top yielding variety to take care of that pest problem?
I think if you have a choice of varieties and one is definitely higher yielding based on local tests than another one, then I would rather someone go ahead and spray. But if the yield is equal, then the resistance would be useful. Or if you really do not want to spray, then you've got that ability to plant a potato leafhopper resistant variety. And some people are willing to take a little bit of a yield loss to not have that nuisance or that spray.
Good point. Any additional thoughts? No? All right. Dr. Putnam, here's a question that I will send your way. If a variety has, or do you feel we are seeing significant advancements in alfalfa as we are seeing in other crops? So do you feel like alfalfa is keeping up to the technology that's being produced for other crops?
With all apologies to plant breeders, Don, I think in some respects we are not keeping up with other crops. I mean, certainly when you look at our I guess a wealthy cousin corn, which corn advancements, and there's a lot of biological reasons for this, but alfalfa has not kept up in terms of yield potential, and I think in many farmers look at alfalfa yields and are a little disappointed. I think some of it is related to the issue of cutting schedules, and I think the reason that we've seen because our yield potential here in our long season environments is something like 12 to 15 tons per acre. I mean, it's a very high yield potential, but the average yields are only 6 to 8 tons per acre, and so we know that we have a higher yield potential there, and it's not necessarily limited by variety. So but in general, our variety trials have not shown a great deal of progress. But we have made a lot of progress on the defense side and pest management, and in terms of, so I think we have made some progress, but I think there's more to do. I don't know if Don would disagree with me or not, but.
No, I think we have concentrated over the years a lot on defense, anything that detracts from yield. But I think there is the potential to do a lot more as far as plant breeding and trying to increase the yield But you have less companies working on alfalfa than say you would, less number of people working on alfalfa than you would on corn. A lot more money there.
And one thing for people to remember, much of the increase in yield in grains has been converting more of the total plant to grain. And with alfalfa or any forage, you're harvesting the whole plant material. So it's hard to make the progress. We haven't seen huge improvements in corn silage yield as we have with corn grain yield, because obviously you're harvesting the whole plant.
And like Dan mentioned earlier, alfalfa is a population, so there's genetically is a little bit more complicated than some other crops. So.
Well, the other thing, just to add to that discussion, is that we need to design our cropping systems. I mean, I guess I would have to say as an agronomist that some of the agronomic management issues like soil fertility or cutting schedules or irrigation management or other kinds of limitations like soil drainage, for example, are going to be more limiting than the variety necessarily. And so we have to design a whole system that comes together. So you have, if you put the crop into a high yielding environment, and we need to have those varieties that will do very well under that high yielding environment. And so I think we have to think of it as a whole package.
I think I agree with Dan there. You can have the very best alfalfa variety, but if you don't have a good fertility program or you don't manage it right, it's not going to perform. So I think it is a whole package. So.
Good discussion. Dr. Miller, we had a question that came in for you. They ask, is anyone growing a 5 fall dormancy rating with good winter survival in the Utah, Idaho area? So a more specific question.
Yeah, you can go to that national list and you can see fall dormancy 5s. And again, if you can look at that winter survival rating of a 2 or a 1, there are other factors that contribute to winter survival. But I think using that fall dormancy rating of a 5 and picking the best winter survival rating that you can get along with the disease package, there would be varieties that would fit in Utah.
Very good. Here's one I'll just pose to the group of you. This person's wondering, are there any new biocheck options for herbicides beyond Roundup Ready? Resistant weeds have become a big issue in this person's area. Any comments on that question or thought?
I don't believe that. I think there may be some efforts in that, but I don't think anything real active or on the horizon in the near future. Do you think, Don? I haven't heard of anything.
No, I agree. I don't think there's anything in the near future that that you're going to see.
But one of the things I will add to that, Abby, is that we did a publication a couple of years ago, which is how to avoid weed resistance in Roundup Ready alfalfa. And Roundup Ready alfalfa has the same problem that Roundup Ready corn and cotton and so forth have, that we could develop resistance. In fact, we have developed, weed resistance in Roundup Ready alfalfa to some degree. And so we need to avoid that. And there are management factors that you can use to address that. So those of you who are interested, shoot me an email or something, I can send it to you. It's
the other thing I would add is make sure you plant a good amount of seed, get a good thick stand to begin with. That helps reduce some of the weed pressure. And then there are some conventional herbicides that you could use, but again, that good stand of alfalfa, making sure that you have good fertility and manage it right, a thick stand helps you as far as that weed pressure out there.
Mm-hmm.
And let me add, when we were first doing trials with Roundup Ready alfalfa, definitely the Roundup did a great job of controlling weeds. And in the non-sprayed plots, we might have 90% weeds, 10% alfalfa in the first cutting. But almost across the board, by the last cutting of that first season, there was very little difference in yield and in the percentage of alfalfa. So good, as both of the speakers have mentioned, good seed, good planting rate, good fertility, getting a good stand, maybe living with some weeds that first or second cutting, letting the alfalfa grow back and compete. That's really your best defense against weeds.
Thank you for that advice. Sounds like going back to the basics can really help prevent a lot of problems. Ray, here's a question for you. Any thoughts on Aphanomyces race 3? He said some seed companies mention this while others don't. Any thoughts there?
So let me make a quick mention and then refer to Don. Where, as with many things, we're learning more and more, and we're finding in some fields that alfalfa varieties for the resistance for race 1 and race 2 are still seeing some issues. So you do see a few varieties in the market that have resistance to race 3 or a kind of a multi-species blend. So we're learning a lot, and I expect as time goes on, we will have more varieties resistant to whether we call it race 3, or just a multiple race population resistance. Don, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the multi-race is a good way of describing it, because right now, there is some talk of a race 3, but there isn't a standard test, and so we don't have a check variety to compare to anything that claims a race 3. So I think some of the companies are saying they have a multi-race, and I think that may be a better approach until we actually have a standard test to really quantify what type of what level of resistance do we have to any other races that might be out there. And so make sure you get a race 1, race 2, or a company that is getting multiple race resistance in their selection process.
And now let me add, if people are having a Phanomyces issue, if they go with the late summer planting, that typically avoids the issue in Kentucky. Can you make a comment on that? Is that a success?
I think that's an option. There's also on seed treatments, they do, for years and years we used, apron on alfalfa as a seed treatment, but now there is the option of another fungicide called Stamina, which has activity on Aphanomyces. So if you're trying to get off to a good start, having a seed that has some fungal treatments that are effective on Aphanomyces might get you off to a good start.
Okay. Our next question is, what alfalfa traits are important when planting a field that is 50% alfalfa, 50% some other grasses? Anyone have comments or recommendations there?
I tend to give the same recommendations that I talked about in my presentation. If it's a mixture, obviously if it's a mixture, you have very few options for weed control except for good management. So I really believe choosing the best variety with a good broad spectrum pest resistance and then having good management fits well with a mixture as well as if you have pure alfalfa.
The only other comment I would have is that, depending on your grass, if you can pick a grass that matches up with a cutting schedule of alfalfa, like a late maturing orchard grass, or, try to match those up. But your cutting schedule can really make a difference on, which one's going to persist, the alfalfa or the grass. And also the cutting height make a difference too.
Yeah, really good point, Don. And I know producers in Kentucky that have made tens of thousands of more per cutting with a late maturing orchard grass when they're taking that first spring cutting, because they don't have over mature orchard grass when the alfalfa is ready. And so making that simple decision of maybe paying a little bit more for a late mature orchard grass can make a huge difference. And that can go with a lot of the other grass species. There is a range of maturity.
Just a comment, we don't do a lot of seeding of grasses with alfalfa here in California, but I would follow Ray's recommendation for using the same kind of varieties. But the big danger is, of course, that the grasses would outcompete the alfalfa under those conditions. And sometimes, we do a lot of overseeding though of older alfalfa stands, which is very successful, and that's generally what we'd recommend is start off with a good alfalfa stand, and then when you begin to have trouble with the stand after several years, overseed it. But I don't think the recommendations for varieties would be that much different under those conditions.
And remember that the same thing, Dan, for us, even people planting Roundup Ready alfalfa, they will in Kentucky plant that, control weeds, and then go back
Right.
the next year and interseed the orchard grass into it. So you can go with a number of combinations. But
Separated
getting
by
that good
time,
standard
right?
alfalfa,
Separated by time. Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have a slightly different topic to discuss now. The question came in, have you done any studies on flaming fields for bugs and weeds? If anyone has comments on that.
We've done over the years, for parasitic weeds, dodder in particular. Dodder is a patchy problem in alfalfa, and particularly in seed fields. But flaming is actually works pretty well under those conditions for specific types of diseases, or I think, I'm sorry, for weeds, for dodder. I don't know if people are familiar with dodder in the East or not, but it's a parasitic weed that infects alfalfa fields, and it's pretty nasty. Once you have it, it's really pretty awful. This is actually one of the reasons to buy the highest quality seed, because it's been certified for lack of weeds. And usually with the seed, you get dodder coming in with the seed, which is kind of a real problem. And once you have it, you have it. You have it for years. And so, but flaming can work in those circumstances, not so much for diseases as for maybe patchy weed, in a time when the crop is more dormant. I think you can probably do that.
We have seen it used a little bit on seed production field, though. When they harvest the alfalfa for seed and the chaff that's out there, sometimes you could have some insects that would damage seed production. But I guess on an alfalfa hay field, I guess the cost of flaming might be is the economics there to do
pretty expensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good points. And we have one final question here. We talk a lot about alfalfa and making their dry hay or haylage, but we have a question here. Are there any seed companies breeding alfalfa for grazing tolerance? Does anyone have any?
Don, let me let you comment on that, and then I can mention some of our work.
Yeah, there has been work done on grazing tolerance. Our company has done some work on that, and we actually have a variety sent in to raise location to test for grazing tolerance. But again, there is work being done on that, and there are a few choices out there.
Right now, if you look in the variety ratings, there's only one or two varieties listed with high resistance to grazing. If you go to our website, again, Google KY forages and go to the alfalfa grazing publication, and we've got a summary chart that lists the varieties that have been tested over the last 15 years, and you'll see that several in there show superior survival under grazing. Now, important comment, any alfalfa will survive grazing if you use the grazing like a hay management. So you give a long rest period, you give a month rest period, and you don't leave the animals on there ideally more than 3 to 5 days. So you have a good rotational grazing system. The grazing tolerance varieties, the advantage is if you're not able to follow that pattern, if there's times that you need to leave them out there longer or graze a little bit quicker, then they give the benefit of survival under those conditions, or maybe wet soil conditions that can survive a little bit better. You don't want to put animals out on most alfalfa varieties if the soils are wet, because the crown damage can lead to crown root rot, etc. So that's the advantage of those varieties. But don't avoid grazing. Just make sure you manage like you would be managing a hay seed.
I'll put a plug in here for Ray's recent booklet on grazing alfalfa, which just came out, about 6 months ago, Ray?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's an I was co-author on it, but it's essentially a really nice review of how you graze alfalfa, and many varieties, are suitable to that, and it can be done. A lot of us are afraid of doing it, but it can be done, and it can be done very successfully.
So if you go to alfalfa.org, go to alfalfa.org under education and publications, you'll see the grazing alfalfa and several other ones. Or simply Google grazing alfalfa publication, and I'm sure that'll pop up. Don?
Yeah, under proper management, grazing is an option. It's just, a lot of people here in the U.S. are afraid of bloat, and but in other parts of the world, like Argentina, I used to do some work in Argentina, and a lot of alfalfa is grazed in in Argentina because of lack of equipment. But again, it has to be proper management, and there are options there.
Yeah, in Argentina, you're talking about millions of acres. Actually, if I walked out my back door within about a half a mile, I'm going to find lots of grazing animals on alfalfa in the winter here in California. Mostly sheep, goats.
Yep.
Well, thank you for discussing that topic. And then also the reminder to our audience that there are many resources out there from either educational institutions or companies that can be utilized to help improve alfalfa production on the farm. So thank you to all of our audience members for submitting those insightful questions. We had a good discussion here. And thank you to the three of you, Dr. Miller, Dr. Smith, and Dr. Putnam, for both your presentations and for offering some more insight and additional information in these question and answer sessions. So thank you very much for that. For everyone who's listening today, I want to let you know that there will be a survey that will pop up following the webinar, and we would appreciate it if you would answer those few questions. It helps us further shape future webinars. And then speaking of future webinars, I would like to ask you to please mark your calendar for the next webcast in the Alfalfa live stream series. Our next presentation will take place in the new year on January 6, 2022 at 11 a.m. Central Time. This webinar will be titled, The Rodney Dangerfield of Field Crops, Why Alfalfa Deserves More Respect. So hopefully that piques your interest. And again, this webinar will be sponsored by Alpha Seeds, and our guests will include Dr. Glenn Shoemaker from the University of Idaho, Dr. John Gazer from Cows Agree Consulting, and Dr. Earl Creech from Utah State University. So we'll have another strong lineup of speakers, and that's sure to be a great program. So we hope to see you then. Once again, thank you to Don, Dan, and Ray for the knowledge you shared today, and to Alpha Seeds for their sponsorship of this program and this Alfalfa live stream series. We hope you'll make plans to attend a future webcast. From our production crew here at Hordes Dairyman and Hay and Forage Grower, we hope that you have a safe and healthy holiday season. Until next time, please take care.